Hello, Guru Nation. Welcome back to the Clinical Trials Guru. I'm here with Larry Ajuan. He's joining us all the way from the United Kingdom. Are you in London?
Netherlands. I'm in the Netherlands,
Oh, you're in
actually,
the
Dan.
Netherlands. Okay, you're not in
Yeah.
London. Why did I think you were in
No.
London? Okay, you're in the Netherlands. You've worked all over Europe, though, uh,
Yeah.
during your career. Spain was one place you mentioned. You've worked for big pharma. You've worked for medium pharma. You've worked for small biotechs. You've worked with almost every CRO imaginable. You got into a lot of database management, outsourcing, procurement, vendor procurement, contracts and budgets. So you've really done a lot, and we're here to talk about your next project that you're working on as a consultant right now and an entrepreneur in the field. But let's go way back to what got you interested in research, and then tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me. My background started, I read chemistry in university, and after a few years, worked in the industry as an analyst. I later on then moved into clinical research. My first role was in the Smith and Beecham back in the UK. I started with data management, did that for a number of years, then moved on to Wyeth also, doing data management there in London. Did a bit of programming, very interesting back in the days of Wyeth. Wyeth later got acquired by Pfizer. And after Wyeth, I moved on into Pfizer. This was in Spain.
Pfizer. Now, how
Yeah,
does one? Let's go back. So, how does one with your background? So you have a chemistry background, right?
yeah.
How does one with your background even know to get into data management with pharma?
That's a good question, Dan. I think after a number of years working, at the bench as an analyst, I always wanted to sort of, work in sort of the medicinal type of chemistry. So I tried to find my way into the pharmaceutical industry, and I was lucky. I got a break with Glaxo. They were growing their data management group. So I thought, okay, I'll just go for about 6 months. I think that was the initial offer. They trained us up in clinical data management, and and I liked it. It was fun. I always thought, okay, it's research driven, and the data was always an attractive part for me.
Okay, so from there, it's easy to connect the dots. Once you're in, everyone has a hard time with getting their foot in the door. So
Yeah.
that's I always try to focus on that first. Once you're in, it's easy to go. I mean, there's so many opportunities that present themselves, which we'll talk about a little bit here, but it's easier to understand. There's many possibilities once you're in, but getting in, much different story, especially
Yeah.
when there's a lack of awareness of what our industry even is all about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I had no idea at all about even clinical research. I always was sort of thinking about the lab side of things, and I think for many of us, that cohort that they were accepted, it was new. It was just
Yeah.
entirely new for us. But I think everybody who started there stayed and just carried on within clinical development.
Okay, so you got in with Glaxo doing data management. A lot of EDC stuff, I'm assuming, or back then
Um,
was CRFs.
It was CRFs, Dan. It was
CRFs.
CRFs. EDC was just beginning to sort of surface, and there was a lot of doubts. It's like, oh, that will never happen. Everything was always going to be on paper. And I remember when the first EDC studies were piloted in Smith and Beecham, it was a whole new world.
People were worried back then that they're going to lose their jobs, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It
And they
was,
didn't lose their jobs,
and they didn't, and they
right?
didn't. And I think more opportunities were created with EDC, as in many technologies. People obviously had to retrain in how to use these EDCs, use them to design CRFs, and obviously, other companies came on board with EDC, and lots of changes as well in the EDC space. So, yeah, it's a growing area.
Now, how did you get from data management to outsourcing, contracting, vendor procurement? Is that what it is? Vendor
Yeah,
procurement?
Yeah, vendor management procurement. After I think in Wire, I had again, I think it was lucky an opportunity at Pfizer. They were growing a biometrics department in Madrid, and they needed people, who had biometrics background. So a lot of what they were doing there was, trying to outsource a lot of their late phase work, in trying to compile the data. And they needed, obviously, a couple of people, with experience in biometrics to help that process. So again, somebody who didn't have that sort of background, I was given the opportunity and trained up at Pfizer to do that kind of role.
Excellent. Okay. So how long did you do that, and what came next? What came after that?
So I did that for about 2 years in Pfizer, and then moved on to Genzyme in the Netherlands. Genzyme then was, small fast-growing biotech company, and they were really needing help with managing the contracting with the sites.
Huh.
So that was the main focus of
Site
that
contracts.
site contracts.
Were you doing just European sites?
Mostly European sites because I was based in the
Ah.
Netherlands. And obviously later on, Genzyme started running trials that involve sites in India, in the Middle East. So that grew, and I think as the company grew and the size of the studies also grew from orphan drugs, we're talking about 10
Mhm.
patients, 20 patients. Now they were going to a couple of hundred patients. So again, we moved more into outsourcing.
I understand. And there's a lot to talk about here, and we will. Um, but it seems like after you got in to the pharma world, you stopped using your chemistry degree. Do you do you regret that, or are you thankful that that's how you got your foot in the door? Because I'm kind of similar in that regard.
Uh, you know, I miss it. Sometimes I kind of miss working, in the lab, analyzing stuff. But no, I don't regret it. And, somehow at the back of my mind, I always sort of, nurse this idea that perhaps one day I'll pick up my lab coat again and,
You
and
always
go and
have
do
that
some
option.
work.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
always
yeah,
have that option.
yeah. But I think it's been very helpful. It's been, to have that science, background and, how you look at data, analyze and
Of
again, I think
course.
have good conversations, with folks with biomedical background. So
Of
been very
course.
helpful.
It doesn't sound like you would have ever got your foot in the door without that degree. Same with me. I have molecular and cellular biology. I don't use it anymore. Ironically enough, the more CRO work I'm starting to do, the more that stuff is starting to come back. And now I'm part
Okay.
of these incubators where biotechs are pitching investors on the science. So I'm starting to use it again, but it's been like 10 years that I haven't used it. Right? So
Yeah,
it's always good to have in your back pocket.
absolutely. And I think, Dan, with molecular biology, I mean, it's all biology now. It's a biological world. I think
Yep.
that's where things are going with, biotech.
So taking off the science hat and putting on the business hat, when you were negotiating contracts with sites, is that what you were doing? Negotiating contracts with sites?
Yes, yes.
What I'm under the impression, and a lot of people tend to agree with me, that pharma is not in does not I mean obviously they want to save money on their trials, but they'd much rather pay more than fair market value if they get a good site. And the issue when it comes to nickel and diming has always been the CROs trying to profit.
Do I think before I think with the Sunshine Act and I think some regulations around the fair market value came into it. Yeah, I think pharma was always, I suppose, willing, more open, to pay a fair price,
Yeah.
provided that the sites or the investigators could deliver, and it was justifiable. I think that was always one of the key things. Can you justify it? It's always very difficult. For example, if you're in one country, and for a particular site they're asking twice as much as another site. Obviously, there will be questions, and there will be some sort of negotiations. But it always comes down to, can it be justified?
Yeah.
If you explain this to a third party who is not very close to this whole process, will they find it reasonable? With the fair market value process, I think things have gotten a bit more tricky, if I can put it that way.
Because pharma's conundrum is they have key opinion leaders, and a lot of these key opinion leaders, they do research, but they don't do a good job of research. They do it for the prestige and to say that they talk about it and for the money, right? And pharma wants to keep them happy. And if there were no Sunshine Acts, nothing would prevent them from paying these KOLs on the back end for doing research rather than on the sales side, right? And they'd sort of have these unofficial agreements like, hey, we're going to make sure that you get more than fairly compensated through research, so that on the sales side we can report that we're not paying you exorbitant fees for your sales for the speaking. So the Sunshine Act, it does have its role in this industry. The problem is 90% of investigators, or more maybe, are not key opinion leaders, but it affects them too. This affects them.
True. I think that the era before the fair market value, I think rules came into it, there was a lot more latitude. I think in terms of negotiation, with sites, KOLs, and it was a different world then. But ever since, I think, both on the pharma side, CRO side, even on the KOL side as well, I think that awareness, that certain data, would need to be sort of, made public.
Yeah.
I think it kind of concentrates the mind and makes sure that we, like everybody basically tries to get the best and the fairest, and I think reasonable deals. For this contract. Because sites, even if it's the same country, some sites, for example, that maybe are public run sites, it's a different pricing structure to a private site or independent site. I imagine that's what also happens in the US.
When you were negotiating with a KOL, if you did, were you ever told by the sponsor, you don't have to name the names, but hey, this is a KOL, make sure that you get them what they want? Or was it ever that, like, I guess, blunt or direct, or was it always just implied that you understood what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's always, you're in the heat of the moment where they need to sign up a site, and the KOL is obviously important to the study. And there is, I think, the hardest negotiations that I've had are certainly the internal ones. If really, it's internal ones because when you're sitting within a legal and compliance group, and you're trying to negotiate a contract, a budget, from the legal perspective, they have to ensure that everything is compliant, and then that's where you have this tension between that side and the business side. And ultimately, I think, as I mentioned before, it's always the question, is this price, is this budget, is it justifiable? You've got to be able to answer that question, and with good rationale. And if you cannot, certainly for me, when I was negotiating this contract, I would never, I don't recall being able to recommend and say, look, we'll need to pay this person X amount just because they've asked for it. It has to be reasonable and justifiable. That's always been the key.
Gotcha. So even if it's KOL, you have to justify it.
You have to justify it, because otherwise, what would be we always said if an auditor came along, even back then, and basically looked at numbers and questioned it, how would you be able to defend and defend those numbers or those costs?
Yeah.
That's certainly what I mean. The cases or the contracts I dealt with,
Mm.
that was how I think I was able. I think the team were able to sort of manage its tensions.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting dynamic. Because I know even now in 2018 with the Sunshine Act in full effect, I know there's a same study, two different sites. I know there's a substantial difference. There could be a substantial difference in budgets, and that comes down to the site's negotiation skills. And I
Correct.
guess what they are able to justify, right?
Yes, correct. And I think, Dan, you mentioned the negotiation. We have to be able to demonstrate that there was a negotiation, right? So, for
Okay.
example, if the sponsor starts out, with say, let me just give a number, $100 per patient, and across all sites in a particular country,
Yeah.
that's a starting point. And then, of course, one of the sites you might say, look, we need 120. Another side might say that's fine. So you can actually demonstrate that you've had a transaction take place and there's been a negotiation. Now,
Gotcha.
some sites are better at negotiation than others, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
but that has to be demonstrated. And I think from the sponsor side, I think what would not be fair would be if a sponsor started out with providing site A X amount and then started with site B, you know Y amount. Again, that will raise questions.
I see. So after the vendor procurement and negotiating contracts, you went into like now you're an independent consultant?
Yep.
What kind of things do you do? What do you consult on?
Okay. The three main aspects. I consult in outsourcing deals with small biotechs. I provide interim support for large pharma. So if they need a procurement manager, outsourcing person, contracting person to come in and help them, with some of their resource needs. I also do business development for biomedical research institutes. Typically, what happens in this area, it's quite interesting, is because some of these institutes don't have BD or licensing teams, and they need to enter into licensing agreements or commercial agreements with more commercial companies. I help them in developing the business case, business plan. I help them in licensing agreements as well, and then I also help in currently with companies who perhaps just need advice as to what sort of sourcing strategies they need to consider or look at when they're entering into clinical development. And this, this
Interesting.
this covers right from phase one all the way to phase four, and even market access kind of studies and projects. And the last part, Dan, I think is trial value app, which I started working on, I think, back in
Yeah,
2014.
which one? Trial Value App.
App, yeah,
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that because that's what you're working on now. Trial
yeah,
Value App. That came from your years of experience on the pharma side.
yes.
When it comes to costs,
When it
that
comes to cost,
okay.
when it comes to site costing, budgets, CRO costs, outsourcing costs, um, you know, all the financial sort of issues around clinical development. And so that's where that came from. And I think a lot of it was because I saw a lot of inefficiencies and problems in the way we managed or developed cost, right from the site side to also to the CRO side and the sponsor side. So I thought we need to find a better way to do this. Excel sheet was always used, and that for me was always a nightmare. Different sheets, different bid grids, different formats. So
Yeah.
I sort of said, there's got to be a better way that we can manage, at least right from the beginning, how we can develop costs and how we can develop budgets.
So
So that's
who's the target user of this Trial Value App?
Traveling app, there are three targets. I think first, the sites. The sites are the primary. I won't say primarily as a starting point. So the idea is that this platform should help sites in order to cost out, their budgets, especially when they have like a protocol or protocol synopsis.
Mm.
They don't have to use Excel sheets, and they can just start, very quickly come up with some numbers. And also on the sponsor side as well, sponsors try to, uh, request bids from CROs. It's all mostly Excel driven.
Mm-hmm.
And also they can use this to actually have that communication with the CROs, and primarily between the sponsors as well as the sites as well. So it's targeted at those three groups.
Sites, sponsors, and who was the third?
And the
Oh,
CROs.
CROs. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Trialvalueapp.com. Is it an actual app in the store right now? iTunes?
Yes, it's on iTunes and on Google Play. It's also available
Interesting.
on a web platform. So the user will just basically go into the website, register. Once you registered, then you have access to the application on Google Play and App Store.
Free for 6 months for sites.
Yeah, so up to 6 months for research sites. And the reason for that, I think, is, in talking with sites, and I'm very mindful, I think, in terms of their costing, pressures and their, budgetary pressures.
Uh-huh.
It's able to demonstrate that there is an approach, that, we can adopt as an industry that makes it, I think, easier for them. There are many instances where sites costs are not fully captured in the beginning of the study.
Right.
And I think, sites sometimes they feel shortchanged. They come out, saying, trying to, revise cost, or saying, that some of their costs are not fully covered.
It's
So
this
what
one.
we try to,
This is the
Yeah.
app.
yeah, that's the app.
Okay.
Yeah. So we try to do that. And apart from the application itself, Dan, what we also try to do is to offer support to the site. So if a new site does not perhaps know how to engage, with sponsors, we can also provide that sort of services to help them in understanding, protocols and how to negotiate or discuss with sponsors on the
Interesting.
budget side.
So I just interviewed yesterday Anna Marquez. I don't know if you saw that one, but I'll send it to you after this video.
Okay. Yeah.
She's a contract and budget expert from the site's perspective. And my business partner, Chris Sauber, is also... I used to negotiate contracts. As of a couple years ago, I stopped. I still do here and there, but I don't do it every day anymore. So what's the practical value for a site to use this thing? Can you get better budgets for your site by using this?
Yes. The idea is that you can get more realistic budgets for your site. And when I mean realistic, right at the beginning of the protocol synopsis development, all the way to the final protocol, there always changes, right, into all these parameters.
Yeah.
Now, the first step is there should be a way where sites can capture those sort of changes. So if they modify the protocol, add a few procedures, the site can quickly, add those protocols or make those changes, and keep on having that communication or that dialogue with the sponsor. I think is an important thing. They don't have to share spreadsheets. It's just, you set up your project, set up your protocol. If procedures are added, it's easy for the sites to add those procedures. Now, all the way to the let's just say the pre-protocol finalization.
So I can add all my assessments on there.
Correct.
Do I have to manually do it, or is there...
There's several options. It can be manually done. So for a new study, a coordinator, can do that. We can also help them to do that, to manually add all those assessments. If a site has a particular type of format they wish to adapt, we can also customize it to that extent. So currently, it's all based on investigator tasks, study coordinator tasks, pharmacy costs, etc. We've broken it in those sort of categories. But if a
Okay.
site says, we want to have it done slightly differently, there is room to make certain adaptations for those sites.
So yeah, I'm looking at it now. So trialvalueapp.com. I have not played around with it yet. Um, but I think a lot of the people would be interested in this. We have a lot of sites out there, and like you said earlier, you've heard it here. If you can justify it to the sponsor, and you can demonstrate that a negotiation took place, you can probably get what you're asking for as long as it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the question: what is reasonable? Well, you could be on the high end of reasonable, on the low end of reasonable, slightly outside the high end, slightly below the low end. But those are thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
So, trial value app, I have not played around with it, but we can talk off the air about this, and I'm actually curious to see from a site how this would work. So let's say a site wants to use it right now. Where would they go?
Well, they just go to the website, trialvalueapp.com, go to the sign up page. They can register. Once they register, we'll get them up and running. We'll arrange an introductory session for the site, show them how to navigate through, how to use it. If they have
Gotcha.
certain studies, that they're currently working on, we can help them to come up with pricing and costs for those studies. And I think more importantly, Dan, it's at that is just the first stage. Trying to come up with some numbers. What it also provides the site is gives them some idea of their resourcing. So
Wow.
they could generate some sort of reports or it shows them, okay, you've got this study. What does that mean in terms of investigators' time or the study coordinator's time?
Hmm.
In terms of hours. Now they can take that information obviously and also use it, I think, for their own internal resource planning. So if a protocol comes your way, you put in the numbers, and it says, look, the investigator is going to be tied up for say 20 hours a week or more for this study. Then you can reassess whether or not you have the resource or whether you need to get an extra resource for that type of study. So it's a decision sort of a support tool right at the beginning when it's most crucial. And of course, as the planning phase proceeds, if a site still wishes to use Excel or their own, tool, we can find a way to, link that up through APIs, so that they don't have to manually keep on doing things.
Hmm. Very interesting. I know a lot of sites would be interested. So really, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is create a platform for site CROs and pharma to come to an agreement on what's fair, to basically to negotiate more efficiently for themselves,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Very interesting. And this is a startup, so I'd be interested to do some follow-ups with you,
Okay,
follow-up interviews, and maybe get you on a webinar for contracts and budgets at some point.
okay. That's
But
good.
I think it's very good to get the insight from a pharma insider on negotiations. So thank you for that, and also your career in the industry is a good model for other people to maybe follow. See, once you're in the industry, I tell everybody, once you're in, it doesn't matter how you get in. You can get in as a patient recruiter. You get in as a clinical trial assistant. You can get in as an in-house CRA. You can get in as a trial master file specialist. You can get in a number of different ways. And that's mostly from the site and CRO. From the pharma, you get in as a bench researcher, right? Doesn't matter. Get in, and then opportunities present themselves. I mean,
Absolutely.
look at Larry. He's a chemistry major, bench researcher, that's doing budgets, contracts. I mean, these are things lawyers do. He doesn't have law training, right? Like education wise, practical wise, you do from the work you've done, but that's not your background, right? So
No.
get in, Guru Nation. There's so many ways there's so many options. Once you're in, you'll figure out what makes you happy, what works for you, um, and be ready to change. Because there's always, look at Larry's now has an app. So a lot of different possibilities. But thank you, Larry. We're gonna do more interviews in the future, and I'll be interested to learn more about the app off the air. So thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks for having me.
Yep, and thank you, Guru Nation, and we'll catch you all later. Bye bye.